Hey guys, welcome back or welcome to the Game Plan T1D Podcast. On this show, we sit down with some of the most inspiring diabetic athletes in the world and discuss their stories to try to uncover what it is that allows them to excel with their T1D. On this week's episode, I spoke with Rob Howe. Rob excelled as an athlete and would go on to earn an opportunity to play professional basketball. In addition to athletics, Rob started Diabetics Doing Things, a diabetes podcast that tells the stories of everyday diabetics and the lives they lead. Please enjoy my conversation with Rob Howe. Welcome to the Game Plan T1D Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Benger. On this podcast, we explore the lives of athletes living with T1D to try to uncover what it is that allows them to excel despite their diabetes. Today on the show, it is my pleasure to be joined by Rob Howe. Rob, welcome to the show.
Sam, excited to be here, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's always nice to be able to talk with a fellow diabetes podcaster, and we're certainly going to dive into the inspiration that drove the creation of Diabetics Doing Things. But first, I wanted to take some time to talk about your background, a bit about what your story was like growing up, and when was it that you first sort of discovered your passion for athletics?
Man, I tell you what, sports has always been a part of my life. I was very fortunate to have been raised by two amazing people and parents. I can't, as I look at my life going forward, I can't attribute any of my success to anything except for the way that my parents brought me up. And I'm very fortunate and very grateful for that and for them for being my parents. My love for sports, man, is my first love. There's a picture of me when my parents lived in Wisconsin for a very short time when I was very young, and we had like a Harry Potter style closet underneath the stairs, and there was a little like toy room that I had, and like I'm surrounded by all these toys, but I'm holding a basketball and I have this little like basketball goal. And I mean, that's kind of been like a metaphor for my life. Like I've always had a lot of things going on, a lot of interest, but man, what gets me fired up is the game of basketball. And man, I took a few years off. I had a bad experience when I was in like third grade, where I was playing for a coach that wasn't very fun and the guys weren't very nice. And I took a couple years off and explored some other sports, but came back when I was in the eighth grade and just, man, never put the ball down.
Yeah, no, I have a limited experience playing basketball. I was, if you can believe it or not, center. And for the audience, I'm 5'7". I was playing center all through growing up, and was outgrowing everybody. Then eventually everyone started outgrowing me. But there's a certain, casualness to basketball that you can always kind of find a pickup game. And I think it's an easy sport to fall in love with. But when and what was the experience like starting to play a little bit more competitively, especially going into high school?
Sure. So, I mean, you're right. There is some sort of cultural phenomenon around basketball. Like it doesn't discriminate based on, age or race or where you're from in the world. It's pretty incredible. So, for me, I started to my eighth grade year, I went out for the team at my school. I had just changed schools and I made the team, and obviously I was like 6'1" in the eighth grade. So I was pretty tall, one of the taller guys on the team. And didn't really develop my skills from the time I took some time off, 3 or 4 years before. And so I was very raw, but my team went undefeated. I had like some awesome, I think of the starting five, every single one played a Division I or II sport in college. Not all basketball, but two baseball players, a football player, and then two basketball players. And so we were really good, and we went undefeated that year. And I was like, man, this is really fun. I really like these guys. I'm going to start taking this a little more seriously. So I started playing summer ball, realized that, wow, the teams we were playing in this junior high league were not very good. There's a lot more better guys out there. And I think that's where, for me, basketball was I was very goofy and uncoordinated because I was growing so fast. I think by the end of my freshman year, I went into my freshman year 6'1". I came out 6'4". By my junior year, I was pretty much fully grown height-wise, like 6'6.5", 6'7". And every time I felt like I would catch up, my body would grow more. And I just, it was very frustrating. And sometimes I'd get made fun of by people because, the game I played wasn't very pretty and all this stuff. So I just kept working and working and working and working. And I remember coming home from school one day, my freshman year, and I had gotten moved up to varsity for a little while to play with the team, just get more experience in practice. And I came home and I was all frustrated. I was like, Mom and Dad, like, I'm never going to be able to dunk. I'm never going to be able to look good, like play good and be strong. And they're like, come on, just keep working. And I was just like very emotional teenager about it. But the funny thing was, my sophomore year, I got diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, like right in the middle of basketball season. I remember December 31st, we had a practice. It was like a Saturday, I think. So it was like New Year's, like get everybody in, make sure nobody's in trouble, tell them, don't go out on the town or whatever, don't get arrested. Typical high school stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember running around and feeling like super tired for no reason and kind of skinny and just, I don't know, I didn't feel good. And obviously was like kind of showing signs of what I now know was DKA. And so I was just kind of wondering what was going on. And I didn't really pay too much attention to the weight loss because I had heard on a broadcast watching the NBA that, you round out into shape, as in the first parts of the season after you get used to running and get used to playing. But I didn't realize that when you're 16, that usually doesn't happen. That's more for older guys. So I was just like, I'm just rounding off into shape, like no big deal. And then after I got diagnosed, I was in the hospital, obviously, like, typical frequent urination. I had lost like 20 pounds. I was very sick. And I feel like immediately in the hospital when they're like, you have diabetes, they gave me the saline bag to rehydrate me. They gave me the insulin and I felt like a superhero. I was like, holy crap, man, this is exactly what was wrong with me.
Mm-hmm.
Cause I don't know if you had a similar reaction in the hospital, but they were like explaining to me what diabetes was in the emergency room. And I'm like, okay. Kind of drinking from a fire hose. And then they gave me the medicine, the insulin and the saline. And I was like, whatever this is, like, this is what was wrong. I feel so good.
Mm-hmm.
So, spent a couple of days in the hospital. My doctors were super encouraging to me about playing basketball because that was my number one concern when I got diagnosed. I wanted to make sure I could still play. I had dreams of playing in college. I had dreams of, playing professionally. That's what I wanted to do. And for that brief moment, I was like, is this getting taken away from me? And my doctors were very clear with me and very awesome with telling me that no matter what dreams I had for my life, they're still within reach as long as I take care of my diabetes. And I know that not everyone gets that experience at diagnosis. So again, I'm very grateful that I had that and my doctors at Children's Medical Center. So the joke is that I wasn't that good before I got diabetes, but after I got diabetes, I started like crushing it. I started obviously I came back, my first game back was on varsity. I had my first double-digit game, points and rebounds at a double-double. I had come off the bench and there were two seniors starting in front of me. And throughout the rest of that season, I just got dramatically leaps and bounds better as we went along. So the joke is all my buddies who've known me for a long time is, yeah, man, like before you got diabetes, you really weren't that good. So it's kind of a fun story in terms of timing. And then continued to play travel ball. I ended up getting a scholarship to the University of Colorado at Colorado Springs and playing 4 years there. Highly competitive Division II basketball. I got to play against some of the best in the world. We played Damian Lillard 3 times at Weber State when I was there. He made us feel like we were really bad, and we were like, man, why is Weber State beating us so bad? They're not even that good of a program. Mm-hmm. And turns out he was just a top 5 basketball player in the world.
Yeah.
And, had plenty of ups and downs, as many college athletes do, with adjusting to the new level, adjusting to the speed of the game, getting in with the new coaches and new teammates, but then also have diabetes on top of that. So, in strenuous practices, certainly had some issues with, cortisol and stress and adrenaline spiking your blood sugar and, not being able to get it down sometimes and then dropping too low and having to have my own private stash of Gatorade in the training room at the practice facility. So, a lot of things that I think a lot of type 1 athletes go through. And actually, it was really interesting. As I sat down in 2015 after my playing career was done and, built my advocacy platform for Diabetics Doing Things, I thought, I'm always happiest when I'm helping people. Who should I help? Is my experience of my life so far, going to be able to help someone? And I thought, you know what, this is a great opportunity to tell people like me the stories of other people like me and inspire them hopefully to continue to chase their dreams alongside their diabetes, not necessarily to have to change them. So, I thought of those moments educating people in the training room, like, yeah, so that blood sugar goes low and I need the Gatorade here, and how awesome it was to have the support of my training staff back then when there really weren't as many resources as there are today to help me along with that. I just, again, as I look through every stage of my life as an athlete, very grateful for the parents who encouraged me, the coaches who were there alongside me, and the training staff that helped me, really maximize the potential that I had there. And luckily enough, I was stubborn enough to chase it around and continue to try to play sports.
Yeah, that was an amazing answer. And I think I want to dive back to that timing issue that you talked about, where your friends were giving you a hard time that, it was the diabetes that brought on, a higher level of basketball for you. But what were, and do you recall any mindset shifts, or what do you attribute that higher level of play to? Was it something that you had to, now with the added burden of diabetes, really dial into nutrition or other things that could propel your game forward? What do you attribute that that shift to in terms of your performance?
Yeah, I think it is a lot about mindset. I think that diabetes diagnosis and that adversity brought that out of me, maybe more. It gave me a little better of a sense of urgency, a sense of preparation, and determination, maybe a little chip on my shoulder a bit. And also, I think it reinforced what was important to me. And I don't know if without that, at that time, if that would have happened organically, or if that just sort of put that in overdrive for me. So I think, in that moment, they say, hey, we think you have type 1 diabetes. You need to drive to the hospital right now, sitting at the urgent care. The 20-minute drive to the hospital, the first thing on my mind was, am I going to be able to play basketball? And if this is taken away from me, I'm going to be heartbroken. And so I think it reinforced for me what was super important. And then when my doctors gave me as long as you take care of your diabetes, everything is still in reach speech, I knew that I was going to just throw myself completely into my management so that I could do the thing that I loved. And so I think it was a little bit of the timing. I was ready for that type of motivation as an athlete, as a human, as kind of growing up a little bit. And then the diabetes diagnosis really forced my hand there to say, okay, if you are serious about this, it's time to go right now. There's no time to really waste.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest thing in terms of a takeaway for diabetics, perhaps after a diagnosis. Diabetes can be such an important instrument in terms of self-reflection and making sure that you are on the right path. In terms of your treatment, nutrition, sleep, everything else that impacts your athletic performance is also going to tie into your diabetes control. So it can be really, a double-edged sword, and there can be a silver lining to that story, to that diagnosis story. But looking back, obviously you would go on, and we can talk about this in a little bit, but your professional basketball career. But looking back on your athletic career, is there a certain part of your system of control that you can reflect on and say, that piece of my diabetes management is really what enabled me to excel as an athlete?
Yeah, I think the routine is what's most important, and kind of being willing to learn by failing. I wrote an email to a kid and his dad the other day who was having trouble with hyperglycemia, high blood sugar before basketball games, because he's getting amped and he's getting stressed and his body's releasing cortisol and his blood sugar is spiking. And I can look back, not without any hard numbers, obviously, but I can look back at games where I played well, and games where I played poorly, and most of the poorly played games were because of a hyperglycemic incident. There was no moment where I didn't have a seizure or anything. There was no definitive type experience, but just a little bit out of range on the high side would cause my hands to be kind of uncoordinated. I had a difficult time catching. I'd be rushed. I wasn't in the right places, in the right spots, and you can tell. And there's really no other answer to that other than my blood sugar was out of whack, and I didn't have the experience at that point to manage it correctly. And I think that's where what would have helped me today. Back then, there was really no advanced CGM technology, so having a CGM now that I could manage my blood sugars with, both in practice and in a game, and be able to see them and make decisions accordingly, I think I would have benefited greatly from that. But, I wouldn't change it. I think I did the best with what I had. My game day routine was where I was able to really make sure that I had as much under control as possible. So I ate at the same time. I tried to eat the same type of meals. I tried to make sure I stayed hydrated. The toughest part for me in college was my road schedule on the road was different than my schedule at home. My home schedule I had dialed in, and I think as a result, most of my my home games were fairly consistent. Away games and back-to-backs and in different towns with different food, eating at different times, not getting a lot of sleep, sometimes would affect the outcome of the game just from the things that we did the day before or the morning of in terms of preparation. So, being patient, I think, was a big thing too, being willing to fail on some of that stuff. And I'm sure I was much harder on myself back then than I am now looking back. But, just testing your blood sugar. I had to change the way that I approached games. I used to get super hyped up. And eventually, I couldn't do that because my blood sugar would be so out of whack. So I had to have a much more calm approach to the game. I'd have to spend more time in the training room, just easing into the flow. And that really paid off dividends for me my junior and senior year where I had my best years.
Yeah, I think there's so much in terms of the pregame rituals that impacts diabetes, and always talking about the effect of cortisol on this podcast with athletes. And I think it's really just about, as you sort of mentioned, knowing what you can control and introducing as much predictability into the pregame process as possible. So we can control our food, we can control when we eat it, we can control when we dose and how much, and the rest is really out of our hands. But if we can control those things and build healthy, predictable patterns of process behind those, that's really going to enable the best control and the highest level of performance. And obviously it looks like you were able to do that. In the fall of 2013, you accepted an offer to play professional basketball for the Washington Generals against the world-famous Harlem Globetrotters on their world tour, and fulfilled a lifelong dream of playing pro basketball. So what was that experience like, especially with the added uncertainty that diabetes brings in terms of fulfilling that lifelong goal? And did you notice or observe any impact on your diabetes as you were playing at the professional level?
Well, I'll tell you this: the professional sports levels are a major grind. It's not for the faint of heart. There's nobody that makes it on a professional sports level that has done so by being lazy and not putting the work in. Certainly, there are a lot of people that are more talented maybe than others, but anybody who's playing for money it's a job, it's a grind, and they're really getting after it. For me, I graduated college the summer of the NBA lockout, so there are a lot of jobs that I potentially would have had overseas that were being taken by mid and lower level NBA guys. So it was slim pickings. I had a couple really great camps. I was in great shape. I got signed with an agency and was very confident that I was going to be picked up by a team overseas in one of the mid-level leagues in either Germany or France or somewhere. I ended up signing a deal with a team in Germany that actually the week before I was supposed to go over there got sold. So a new entity bought the team, and they cut all the foreign contracts because they were more expensive, and they kind of went with some of the local guys. And the type of player that I was, I'm a good locker room guy. I'm a 15 points a game scorer, 7-8 rebounds a game scorer, or a rebounder. There are guys like me over in Europe, and they were looking for guys on teams who are major athletes or dead-eye, big number shooters and people who are going to sell tickets. So it was tough. All that to say, there was a limited space for me. I knew I wasn't going to be on the NBA level at that point. I'm just not that type of athlete, or I don't have that skill set. And there just were a limited amount of jobs. So after the team got sold, I couldn't go to Germany. So I went back. I went to a couple NBA D-League tryouts, did very well there as well. Just started meeting people, went back and accepted a job, a marketing job where I'd done my internship with the U.S. Olympic Committee at USA Boxing, which was really awesome. So I had this great professional experience, but I knew deep down I still wanted to play. So, at one point I was playing in men's leagues around Colorado Springs 6 nights a week. I was driving to Denver. I had hired a trainer. I was spending all my extra money on on training, really trying to get better. So I went back again the next summer to the same camp, had about the same result. Went to an NBA D-League national tryout, played really well, had a great showing, but again, just not that level of athlete, and wasn't what those teams needed at that point. And but I did make a contact there who said, "Hey man, like we just love what you've done with your game over the last year. You're clearly dedicated. If there's anything I can do for you, let me know." So a buddy that I had met the year before was like, "Hey, I have this opportunity last year to go on tour playing against the Globetrotters." He's like, "It's a great gig and really good folks and high level of play. I think you'd be good for it, and I can make that introduction." So I made the introduction, but I needed references and film. And so I got the D-League coach at that tryout to write me a letter of recommendation from the basketball side. I had, professional references. I probably went through 6 months of psych evaluations. And then I remember it was about this time of year, just before Halloween, just before my birthday, where I got the call. And I just remember that moment when I was, hey, we're going to sign you. You're going to be a professional basketball player. You are a professional basketball player for the Washington Generals. You're going to go on tour. And I immediately hung up the phone, called my dad. And, it was just it was a very emotional moment, man. It was something that you've worked your whole life for, and putting, my professional career on hold. I sort of always knew that I could come back to the desk and be a marketing guy. I felt like I was a businessman was always going to be something I could do, but I had a limited amount of time I was going to be able to play the sport that I love at the highest level that I could. And so to actually get that was really incredible. And I'm very grateful for those, that one season that I played with the Generals, because I get to put professional basketball player on my resume now. And, I get to have the pictures in the office, and that's all I really wanted, is to be able to say, hey, I had this dream. I risked everything at the time, and I got what I was looking for. And I had some awesome experiences. Got to play on an aircraft carrier in the Persian Gulf, on the deck of an aircraft carrier. Got to play in NBA arenas around the United States. Got to travel to countries all over the world. Got to do things that most people don't get to do because I was alongside that organization. And it was over quicker than I anticipated, but at the end of that, when they didn't renew my contract, I sat down. I was like, my body hurts. I don't think I want to go grind it out anymore in the lower professional leagues in the States. So I'm gonna officially retire from professional basketball and go get a job. And I haven't regretted it a single day.
That's amazing. And yeah, as someone who pursued that same professional sports dream, just so appreciative of the hard work that it takes to get there. And Rob, do you think, and as you kind of reflect back on your career, do you attribute any of the grind of diabetes, the mindset that it required you to take on, do you attribute any of your ability to grind it out in terms of the professional sports realm being benefited by you having diabetes?
Yeah, I think so. Let's be totally transparent. I didn't have any real adversity in my life. Sure, I worked hard, but I'm very privileged and very grateful for the life that I've had. But I didn't have to fight for meals. I wasn't really grinding it out when I was younger. And sports and diabetes were really the places where I learned that, and I really had to get outside my comfort zone from a dedication standpoint. So college basketball, that was the hardest I ever struggled with anything. Mentally, physically, I was exhausted almost all the time. And my coach didn't really like me, so I didn't get the playing time I thought I deserved. But for the first couple of years, and then just paid my time and just refused to give up. So I think the diabetes made me better at failing and not being defeated. And basketball was that too, because you can't win every game. You can't win every possession. You can't win every time you step on the floor. Sometimes the guy across from you is going to be better, and you just have to be willing to have a short memory and just say, okay, well, what can I learn from this? Let's move on. How can I do better next time? And so I think there are elements to both, but I'm grateful for that struggle. I look back to those college basketball years, I could have the worst boss, the hardest, most demanding guy in all of the business world, and he could think he was the toughest son of a bitch to ever lace him up, pardon my French. And he would not come close to how hard I worked every single day of my life to get on the floor playing college basketball. So I'm grateful for that experience, and also the relationships that I made with my teammates in those times, because it got me and made me the man that I am today. And I think the same thing with diabetes is, if I hadn't had learned from and being willing to take risks to play and do the thing that I loved with my diabetes, stepping out into the great unknown, I wouldn't be who I am today. And so I'm grateful for it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you there. And I think looking back now on my own sports career, and I'm sure you can attest to this as well, but sports is really the ultimate character building experience. And it's really this crucible in terms of character development, and you learn so much about yourself and your work ethic, and what it means to be truly dedicated. And I think I'm also starting to now, after 18 years of living as a diabetic, understand the benefits to character development of diabetes, because even with a CGM and even with I'm wearing a wireless insulin pump right now, and really compared to a lot of people in the world have it made from a diabetes standpoint, but there are still struggles to that I think helped me grow as a person. But yeah, switching gears a little bit, obviously you've had a great athletic career, and now you're doing a lot of great things on the advocacy front with Diabetics Doing Things. If you guys haven't heard Rob's podcast or seen his platform, pause the podcast right now. Go check it out, Diabetics Doing Things. It's awesome work he's doing. Can you dive into a little bit more about what inspired this and really what you guys are trying to do going forward?
Yeah, I think first of all, thank you. Always, it kind of blows my mind that we've came from an idea to something that a lot of people know about and has helped people. And I get messages from people that says, what we do with Diabetics Doing Things has helped them in different ways with their life or their diabetes, or just gave them encouragement. Those types of things really fill me up as a person. And that's where the inspiration came from. I remember I was in Colombia, in Bogota, in 2015, and I was on like a work exchange trip. And I had to spend time in the hotel room because it wasn't safe to go out at certain times of the night without the translator. And I was there for a couple weeks, so he couldn't spend all the time with me. So I had a couple days where I had extra space and time to think, and I had purposefully blocked off time to try to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. Typical millennial, 26-year-old type experience. And so I sat down, I was thinking, and I remember distinctly this conversation I had with my dad when I was like 17, when I was trying to figure out what I was going to volunteer for my National Honor Society hours to, check that box of extracurricular activities so I could get into, more scholarships in college or whatever the case. And he was like, well, the thing I know about you is that you're always happiest when you're helping people. And that really stuck with me. And so, 8 years later or 9 years later, whatever the case is, I sat in that hotel room and I remembered that. And I was like, okay, well, how do I help people and who do I help? And I was like, well, for the first time, it really clicked with me kind of right instantly. I had this moment where I was like, hey, I have type 1 diabetes. I'm sure there are people out there with type 1 diabetes who would benefit from hearing about my experience and who I might be able to help. So I started doing the research, and I was like, okay, this is kind of cool. And there was just starting to be diabetes Instagram and just starting to be these other things. And there were a couple other podcasts at the time, but not very many. And I was like, you know what? I know that I don't want to write a blog every week because that just sounded like a whole lot of work, but I'd love to talk to people on a podcast and learn how to do podcasting. I think that's interesting. And I think it would be fun to meet people and have them tell their story. And so I came up with Diabetics Doing Things, kind of as a working title. It felt like that was what I wanted people to look for. Everyone, when they get diagnosed, looks for other people with diabetes who do the thing that they love. So I thought, why not be the place where they find those stories? And so now I think I just published my 102nd episode the other day, and we've got about 100 episodes coming for the next year, which is mind-blowing to say, and a little bit of a teaser for the new format of the podcast called Tools of Type 1s. Be on the lookout for in 2019. But it's been the coolest thing, and it's taken me now around the world. It's taken me all over the country, and I just cannot say how grateful I am to have met everyone via Instagram or friends like my friend Brandon Benson introduced you and I. The community has been incredible, and I meet new people all the time, whether face-to-face or online or via email or, friends of friends. Some of my friends will text me saying, hey, I met a friend the other day who's a type 1 diabetic. I told him about your podcast, that you probably have a new follower on Instagram. And that happens so often now. I laugh, like, that's exactly what I wanted. And it's a huge part of my life, and it's continuing to grow. I'm just so happy that I still have the support. And you know what? I've helped people, and that was my goal from the start, was to help one person. I decided I was going to do 10 episodes, and if I helped one person, that I would keep doing it. And it didn't even take 10 episodes for somebody to reach out and say that it helped them. And that to me has always been the goal. Some days that person is me. Some days I get the most help out of it, whether it's me asking a question, or it's me just reading a story, or it's me having a higher purpose to do something that I know helps people. And I'm super excited for the future of Diabetics Doing Things. I'm trying to figure out, I've gone 3 years now as kind of the new kid on the block and going and doing speaking, going to do these other things. And now I'm trying to figure out, how do we make a lasting impact for the next 50 years? How do we fit into the next 50 years of type 1 diabetes and type 1 diabetes life and research, and just trying to solve that puzzle. And, hopefully we'll come up with it. But I know that meeting people like you and others in the community just makes me super excited that, there's going to be more Sam Bengers out there. There's going to be more Rob Howes coming out there, hopefully as a result of the work that people like you are doing. So super exciting.
Yeah, powerful stuff. And I think I can definitely attest to the fact that in starting Game Plan T1D, just being exposed to the advocacy community for the T1D community has just been such a wonderful process and an inspiring process and a rejuvenating process. I think everybody goes through a bit of a diabetes burnout at some point in their life where, their care might fall off, where they just get, kind of run down by their diabetes. But it's such a recharging process for me doing these podcasts, having people reach out, and just trying to get the word out about these diabetic athletes who are just crushing it out there. So in the spirit of helping others, and as a sort of common sign-off question, we want to ask you, Rob, if you could send a message to a struggling person with T1D out there, perhaps they were just diagnosed, or as I mentioned, they could just be kind of going through a rough patch, what would your message be to that individual, and why?
My message would be, use your voice. You can't be helped unless you ask. And Diabetics Doing Things, as far as we've come to this point, has only been because I asked for things and people were willing to help. As you were kind of talking, I was thinking, I can't believe there was a time when I didn't have any type 1 diabetic friends, because now I have so many who are very close to me and have helped me out countless times. And I want people to know that you can have friends with diabetes that really will change your life. So use your voice. It's up to you to initiate that conversation, to follow that person on Instagram, or message that person, or send that email, or talk to that person who you see wearing a pump or whose pump tube is sticking out of their pocket. Use your voice, and you'll be so surprised by what comes back in return once you kind of overcome that fear, and you'll learn the power of your voice. And I think that is something that if I could have one thing to tell to anybody, that would be it.
Yeah, couldn't endorse that message anymore. And I think, it's obviously not the best of circumstances that bring us together as diabetics, but you can uncover some really, really fascinating and deep and powerful and moving relationships with other diabetics. So couldn't endorse that message more. And Rob, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Again, guys, go check out Diabetics Doing Things if you haven't. And Rob, thanks again. I really appreciate you coming on, and best of luck moving forward with Diabetics Doing Things.
Thank you, Sam. And really, man, I'm excited to see what you do from here. You're a young guy with a great start, and excited to be along for the ride. I am Rob Howe. I have type 1 diabetes, and I have a game plan.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Game Plan T1D podcast. For related content, please visit www.gameplant1d.com or follow us on social media @GamePlanT1D. Find your game plan.